Okay. Hello, everybody. Today I'm speaking with Jasmin Makhlouf.
Hello,
thank you very
everyone.
much. Thank you for joining me, Jasmin. Jasmin is now at the end of a master's degree in philosophy. So in my mind, you're a philosopher already.
Oh, wow.
And you have been kind enough to select 3 books for us to discuss today. So please share with us that list of 3 books.
Okay, so the first book I decided to talk about today is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He's one of my favorite authors, and this is also one of my favorite books. It's one of the first I actually bought, and I bought it when I was in Italy. This is why it's in Italian. And then the second book I chose is Plato's 5 Dialogues. I think this was like one of my philosophical milestones in a sense, and it's a book that every time I read, I learn something different from it. Especially because every time I TA with a professor, they teach it as part of like an introductory course, and so every professor would, every professor has a different interpretation and gives it in a different way, and students also perceive it differently. So this year it was very interesting. Like they all hated Socrates, and I was just wondering why. And then the third book, it's actually a book of poetry by Nizar Qabbani, and it's called On Entering the Sea. It's actually a compilation of poetry that basically discusses sexuality and eroticism in the Middle East, but it's not just in the Middle East. It's also approached through the feminine lens of it, which is something that is not really common or very popular, and I think this is what makes Nizar very special, and this is why he's my favorite. Yeah.
Great, very nice selection, including a work of, I don't know how to categorize, what's the genre of The Little Prince? It's very difficult to, I think it is its own genre.
Yes, I think it's very existential.
Yeah. Existential, I don't know, comic book, picture book.
Yes, it's a children book, but it's really not for children.
Right.
I mean, it is for children, but it's also for adults. And this is why
it shares that feature with the dialogues of Plato. It's at different times it gives different things.
Yes, exactly.
And a book of poetry, which I only read one of the poems from that collection, and otherwise, but I'm looking forward to reading to hearing about it first, and then maybe reading it.
Yes. Yes, of course. And I can actually read to you some of like the shortest poems, like the ones that I really like. The ones I sent you was my favorite, like my absolute favorite. Yes.
Great. Okay. So shall we begin with which one?
The Little Prince.
Okay, sure. It's also one of my favorites. It is a landmark. It is a landmark book, and I won't forget the impact where I read it and how that it's full of little stories itself. So tell me, why is it significant?
Okay, so this book is actually very significant to me because I bought it. I started reading when I was really young, but I have a small problem in reading. Like I didn't know I needed glasses, and so I couldn't really like see the words well. And then I realized I have a very slight form of dyslexia, so it was kind of hard for me to go through it. Like I struggled in the beginning, but now like I still struggle sometimes, but it's not as strong as it was before. And this book was very much speaking to me as a child. The thing is that in the very beginning, there's the picture. I want to show you the picture. There's the picture of the hat, which is not a hat. It's actually a snake who has digested or ingested an elephant. So like, this is it. It looks like a hat, but it's not. And I think this is like the very first lesson that, you get as a child. Like, oh my God, not everything is what it seems to be. And then, there's this whole talk about giving up your dreams, which is very sad. I mean, when I was reading it as a child, I said to myself, I will never be like the person who wrote the book, because I didn't realize that De Saint-Exupéry was actually an aviator in the war, and he had to face a lot of horrible things in his life. And I told myself I would never be like him, and I will follow my dreams and everything. But then I told myself, well, maybe I need to know more about the author. But this obviously happened later on in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I realized that he had suffered so much, I started looking at the book in a very different way. And I started realizing that this is a book about loss.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about loss. And I mean, he lost his family. He lost his son. I think his son passed away. It wasn't him. I think someone very important to him passed away in his family, and also his wife. And so I think, he lost a lot, especially in the war. There's also this representation of loss from the side of the people, the nation, right? So the war entails a lot of loss in terms of like death, and there is no more peace. There's no more stability. And this book, it's very interesting because in a way, it helped the author escape from his own reality, but it also helps the people who read it escape from their own reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like to do that, there was some sort of like progression to his childhood. And I think he actually lived a very happy childhood, or this is what I've been reading, like from like, I was trying to see how good was his childhood. And I mean, many articles mentioned that he had a happy one. And so I started realizing that maybe the Little Prince is him, but in the form of a child. And I think this is very interesting, especially because he has a huge dialogue with the Little Prince, because he describes himself as an aviator fallen into the desert. And it's in the desert that he meets the Little Prince.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this huge conversation with himself. And, it just makes me think of, I don't know if this is how you pronounce his name, but there's this psychologist, his name is Jung. I think he's
Jung,
Swedish or something.
Carl Jung.
Jung, it's not a J. Okay, Jung, yes. And it just makes me think about the different archetypes in our lives, right? So he says that there's these archetypes are like Plato's forms, and the archetype is just like a model for people's behavior, and here I see the child archetype, this desire for innocence, this longing for returning to childhood, to a stage in life that was so much better. But it's also, so in a sense, the loss is hopeful, because there's always this way for us to go back in time and think about our childhood, but at the same time, which is, I didn't understand when I was a child, but now I do understand it because I'm not a child anymore. And I wish I could do the same thing that he did with his book. But then there's also this sad kind of loss. And when I think of loss, I always think of Melancholia by Freud, right? And because we don't know how to grieve. That's the point. We don't know how to give up. We just don't give up that easily. And I think this is very obvious when the Little Prince, for example, starts his journey by leaving the rose. He starts the journey because he doesn't want to stay with the rose anymore, because he's angry at the rose, because the rose rejected him. And so this is, as a child, you would say, well, this is normal behavior, because children, when they don't get what they want, it's fine. They just leave. They cry a bit. They make some noise, and then that's it. But as adults, we do really run away from what scares us, especially when we have responsibilities towards that person or that thing. The thing in this case is the rose, but yeah, it's obviously a representation of his wife or his lover, I think. And this is so much to take in for a child. And so the child believes, well, okay, it's okay. This person doesn't like me. I'm just going to leave. But a person, an adult that understands what's going on, still runs away from those kind of responsibilities, because as we will see later in the book, when the Little Prince realizes that there are many roses like his, he starts thinking, well, maybe the rose that I had was not unique enough. But then the fox comes in and tells him, no, it's unique because you tamed it, because it's yours, because of the relationship that you have nurtured with the rose. And so here you stop for a moment and you tell yourself, well, this is something that it's very deep, and a child wouldn't get it not because they're stupid, but because they have not reached the level where they can actually create such relationships with adults, or at least they're not conscious of, well, I'm not an expert in child psychology, but it's just an assumption I have. They're not aware of the kind of relationship that is being built. And so...
in a way, we can say that in underestimating himself, he comes to believe that just having those features, objective features, is what makes the rose the rose.
Exactly.
And so he kind of blocks himself from the view, and he's being overly objective in a sense, and not including himself in the identity of, not in the identity, but in what it is that rose, that makes that rose significant.
Yes.
I also really like that you framed it in terms of a story about loss and inevitable grief, because from the very beginning he has to either stay in on his planet, or he has to go, and no matter what he does, he will lose something.
Exactly.
You know, if a person refuses to grow up and go and take responsibility, they will lose something, and if they go take responsibility, they will lose their safe, little planet. So no matter what, we will
always lose.
Yeah, we will always lose, but we will always gain
that's
too.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, and I also just realized something, that he does something very early on. Actually, in the very beginning of the book, he equalizes the perspective of a child, or the childhood perspective, with the perspective of adults, and he gives validity to both perspectives. It's kind of like a phenomenological reduction. So it's a reduction to it's a form of reduction that, taking appearances seriously and then examining what is really behind them.
Yes, and I think that this kind of loss is, in a sense, is what makes us who we are. Because as we know, like in Freud, we understand that all the objects that we lose are the things that kind of make the subject, in a sense. And so all of his losses compiled together become himself. But the problem is that when we deal with loss, what do? This is important. And when I said, because there are two ways we can deal with it. We can either mourn, so we can go through the process of mourning, or we can fall into melancholia. And I said that this is melancholia because at the end, the little prince actually commits suicide. And I know people don't like to think about this, and it's written in a fantastic way. So children, when they read it, they say, "Oh, the snake was the gate back to his planet," but his planet doesn't really exist.
Right.
That's the point, and this is why it's a very saddening story. And I'm so happy that when I was a child, I thought he was just going back to his planet, and that he didn't commit suicide, because that would have been horrible. But suicide is just, the ultimate symptom of mourning in the wrong way. And I don't know. I really do have mixed feelings towards this book, because I love it so much, but at the same time, it just shows me what a horrible place is the world. Because every time, when in his journey, the little prince sees many different people, and every person for him is empty. I mean, they have nothing. They are nothing, because they're just focused so much on something that doesn't give them purpose. And I think this is the real world. This is how people are. They're the ones who are after money. They're the ones who are after fame. They're the ones who are after, I don't know, work, fame. Is there something like this? I don't know. But they're, at the end, they're empty. And this is very saddening. I mean, this is a very sad book. I can't stop thinking about it.
Especially the sadness. I think you're right. That's why I can't read it very often.
Yes.
I can't. The sadness that you talk about is not something that happens at the end of the book. It's not one sad event at the end. It is, the mood is present from the very beginning.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I agree. It makes the whole thing difficult to read. But there are funny moments in it too. There's some funny moments in it. Do you have pet birds?
A pet?
Pet birds?
Pet birds? Oh no, I don't
Oh,
have pet
I heard
birds.
some bird sounds.
Oh yeah, but like we have like because we feed them.
Okay.
Like we don't call them pet because having a pet
Right,
bird would
right,
mean
right,
to
right.
put them in a cage,
Yes,
and I wouldn't take away their freedom. It's the
me
only
too.
thing they have.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad. Yeah, it is a sad book, but for people who haven't read it, I'm always surprised. I teach, as you know, I teach at the University of Macau, and because of the place, because of the cultural background, kids read different things, and I'm always surprised that most of my students haven't heard of this book. I think it is worth reading. For me, when I was growing up, it was this one, The Little Prince, and another author somehow comparable, Shel Silverstein. Do you know him?
Okay.
Shel Silverstein is an
Mm,
American writer who also drew in his books, and his famous
okay.
book, I think, was The Giving Tree. It's a story of also very sad from the very beginning,
Oh.
but also for
Oh.
children, also written for children. It's about
Oh
a
God.
child who continues to sacrifice himself for a boy who grows up, and
Wow.
yeah.
I think it's a feature of humans. Every time we write a children's story, uh, there's an element of sadness because we just want to return to childhood. This
Maybe.
is all we want to do, and then I mean,
And
if I
combined,
could, I would.
it's a yearning to go back, combined with knowing that it is impossible.
Yes,
It's like a
yes,
lost
and
situation.
it's the impossibility of it that makes it so romantic in a sense, but not romantic in the sense of like Romeo and Juliet romantic. No, like romantic. This is why this is an excellent book because there's this. I think there is this romanticization of death in a sense because it's something so honorable that we do that we give up our childhood to enter the world of becoming an adult and like take on responsibilities, but at the same time we're doing it to be reunited with what we think is important to us. And at the same time is again really sad because we're just giving up the one thing that makes us happy.
Hmm.
And I think this is a very good explanation for why no one is actually really happy.
Hmm.
But that's my opinion. And I hope it's wrong.
Oh, that's great.
I hope it's wrong.
I love that. I love that. That's my opinion, and I hope it's wrong. It's,
Yes, of course. I mean, I
that's
don't wish anyone to be sad.
right, right. That's like one of the. It reminds me of some characters from the Plato's dialogues who want.
Oh, like
I
who?
mean, some of them want to disprove, to argue against Socrates and win in that
Yes.
argument. But there are some characters, especially in the Republic, who want Socrates to tell them that justice is the right thing. Please tell us. We have
Yes.
never heard a good defense of justice and a good life, that
Yes.
it leads to happiness. So yeah, that's good.
This is true.
That's great. Uh, okay, shall we move to the next one? Nizar
Yes.
Qabbani.
Yes. I think I would like to go with Plato
Oh, okay.
because I'm ordering them in like chronological order
Right, right.
because I started with the Little Prince and then I met Plato and then I met Nizar like later on in my life when I was like old enough to read and understand his poetry.
Right, right.
Yes. So Plato has been like the first philosopher I have encountered. Originally, I have a bachelor in political science, and so political science is different from philosophy, but we do study political theory, and so we study Plato and Aristotle and Machiavelli and Hobbes and Locke and all of these great philosophers. But Plato was the first, and I really did fall in love with philosophy when I started reading Plato because there is something about him that many don't see, but it's there. Like people think, oh, this is just a very old dialogue with historical references and references to mythology that we don't know and probably we will never hear about again. But there is something in the dialogues that actually helps you see and understand yourself better. And this is why I really like this book. And the idea is that each and every single dialogue shows us different aspects of our life that we should inquire and inspect and examine, but we don't. It's like the Little Prince. There are certain things that we take for granted. Like growing up, we take it for granted. We have to grow up. But we don't have to. We don't have to. But I mean, if we just regress into that, we'll probably just get into psychosis. Like, I'm not suggesting that.
Right.
But I'm saying we should hold on to, like, being a child, because this is important for us. But at the same time, there are certain things that we need to examine within ourselves. So we need some, like, introspection. And Plato actually really does help us do that. And in the 5 dialogues, there are 5 different dialogues. So we have Lucifer, which is like the introduction. Okay, each dialogue is a separate dialogue, but they're put together in a way that it makes sense for the plot line, in a way. And like Lucifer just introduces the drama in a sense, and it tells us why Socrates is being sent to court, and what happens, and what are the what is he charged of. And then there's the apology, where he defends himself in front of the jury. And please note that in Athens, the juries were humongous, and like there were more than 500 people. And so I can only believe that Socrates would be very anxious, because I mean, I'm anxious now, and like we're just 2 people. Imagine Socrates in front of 500 people. And then there's Crito, or people say Crito, but I think it's Crito, because it's Greek, so there's the E, the Crito, yes. And here Socrates is in jail, and his friend Crito comes and tells him, if you want to escape, I can help you escape. But he doesn't want to. He says, no, I can't do that. Then after Crito comes the Meno, where the Meno is very important, because people look at usually students when we read the dialogues, they look at the Meno and say, oh, but it's geometry. Why are we talking about geometry? But geometry is a way for us to introduce the pre-existence of the soul, and it's also about the teachability of virtue. Can we teach the good? Can the good be taught to other people? And I think this is one of the most beautiful and most important dialogues that basically precedes the Phaedo. The Phaedo is where Socrates died. And he just takes the poison, and it's a very sad and dramatic scene, because you're always there siding with Socrates, saying, oh no, he's the just person, and he just wants to unmask injustice and make sure that the wise men are not taken as wise men, because they're not, right? But what I realized is that this year, especially, some students were actually happy Socrates died.
Oh, wow.
And yes, I was just like amazed.
That's really, for me,
Really
it's difficult to
amazed.
imagine that position. It's very difficult. But I will tell you one thing. I will not mention his name, but it's one of those recent popular histories of philosophy that unfortunately I bought. Big mistake. Rookie mistake. Want to support bookstores and philosophers.
Yes.
But it's this little history of philosophy begins with Plato and Socrates. And one of the first things he writes about Socrates is that he was an annoying person.
Oh,
Like,
well.
So immediately this author, this philosopher who's writing this book, he's taking sides with those people who condemned Socrates by calling him annoying. He didn't say they thought he was annoying. He just said he was an annoying person.
I mean, we have to be honest. Like, Socrates is a bit annoying, especially when he throws in his irony and sarcasm.
Right,
but we are annoyed because we're the other person.
but from the perspective of a philosopher, that shouldn't be his most salient feature. Maybe that he was going for a purpose.
Yes. I've got a student who said that he wanted to punch Socrates in the face. And I'm like, okay, this is escalation of violence. But I totally agree, or not totally agree, but I totally understand why they would say this, because we're always the other person. We're never Socrates. That's the point. When we read when I first read dialogues, all of them, I mean, I would like to speak about Euthyphro because it's my favorite. But, when I first read Euthyphro, I was Euthyphro. I wasn't understanding the questions that were being posed by Socrates at all. And then every time I would have to, I mean, this version, the one by Hackett with the group translation, is very good. I mean, it's very easy to understand, and you know, the footnotes are very helpful because I didn't know anything about mythology or ancient Greek history or any of those details. I didn't know what many words meant, the meaning of many words. But this edition was very helpful. But I was youthful. I didn't realize. I read the dialogue and I went through it and I finished it, and I still didn't understand what Socrates wanted from Euthyphro.
Right.
But then I realized that, you know, he's not just looking for a definition. No, he wants to see, and he wants to see who the real wise men are, right? Because many people claim to be wise, but they're not. And this is something, sorry. And this is something that is very common in our world, right? There are so many people, they believe they're wise, but they're not. But unfortunately, Socrates is not there anymore. And so it's our duty to make sure that we unmask those not so wise men, right? And the way he does it in Euthyphro is very smart. Because also Plato is very good at writing. You know, it's very, people would say it's very basic, but I don't think it's very basic. I think it's amazing. It's very good. It makes you feel like you want to know what's coming next in the conversation. And it starts by asking, they meet each other randomly as if they met each other like in front of a cafe, right? And they're like, oh, what are you doing here? And everyone tells the other what they're doing. And Socrates realizes that Euthyphro is actually persecuting his father, and he's kind of shocked. And people don't understand why he's shocked. But in ancient Greece, the father was like the priest of the household. So it was kind of a big deal, like prosecuting your father. It wasn't like, oh, you're prosecuting your father for murder. Good job. That's the right thing to do. No. And also, this is a big decision that we need to examine before we do anything at all, right? And in the dialogue, there are like 7 or 6 different, I think it's 7 definitions for piety. And at the end of the dialogue, Euthyphro goes back to the initial one, that piety is what is dear to the gods. But the idea is not just that we're looking for the definition for piety. The dialogue shows to us that this dialogue was mainly for Euthyphro to understand that what he was doing was wrong, and that he didn't even really prepare for the case because his father murdered someone who murdered his slave. So he was basically, he murdered a murderer, which doesn't make it any less evil in a sense.
Sure.
But at the same time, why go this, why go the extra mile to prosecute your father, right? So there's an element of mystery in the dialogue, but at the same time, it's a definition of piety. It's understanding why you're doing something, and the why is very important. And because sometimes we do things out of impulse, and Euthyphro is an excellent example of being impulsive. Because sometimes we take decisions on the spot and we think it's the right thing, but it's actually not. And this becomes, very important. I make some notes because I need structure in my life. And this becomes very important when he asks the core question of the dialogue, in a sense. And it's basically asking, is piety, if we're thinking about piety as being the thing, pious is what is dear to the gods. And the gods are always involved, and the love of the gods has meaning, has relevance in the meaning for piety. Then is something pious because it's pious, or is it pious because it's being loved by the gods? And this is something very important. It's not just about understanding the causality of things, but it's also understanding why are we doing certain things. I mean, are we doing them because they're good, because they're right, because they're just, or are we doing them for other motives? And this is something we don't really stop and think about most of the times. We just do it like, what I see a lot in my students is that some people just decide to pursue a degree in political science because, it's a prestigious field, or their parents want them to do that. So, I mean, I wish Plato was taught in high schools and schools in general, because then kids would ask themselves, am I going to become an engineer because it's good, because it's what I love, because it's right, because we need engineers in the world, or am I doing it because being an engineer would be, would make my parents happy?
Right.
And we need to evaluate those kind of decisions, and it's very important. And this question was one of the hardest, actually. I didn't get it. I didn't get the meaning of the question. I only got it like after I read the dialogue for 10 times, 15 times, and there was like space, like there were breaks between the different readings of the dialogue, and I think that's okay.
Of course,
this is why I love Euthyphro so much, because I was Euthyphro. I mean, at the end, Euthyphro still...
Right, and actually Plato makes Euthyphro say, like, I don't get the question. Well, I don't know what you mean. The first time Socrates asks, what is it? Is it is being pious because the action is good, or is it because the action is loved by the gods? Euthyphro says, no, please explain yourself. And he says, okay. And then Socrates makes some really interesting distinctions to pave the way for that understanding.
Yes, exactly.
Like the difference.
And that was very useful.
Yeah, it was.
Yes, because we're all Euthyphro. In reality, we all are. We can never be Socrates.
Right.
We can never, because if we are Socrates, then what do we have left? I mean,
it would also be difficult to survive if we are Socrates.
Exactly.
We will put ourselves in dangerous situations, for sure. Yes,
especially for teachers, like corrupting the youth.
Of course. Yeah.
I mean, that's not something you want to be charged with. But I mean, it's also very important as a question, because philosophically speaking, because it brings in the teleological aspect of the question, right? Especially when we speak about monotheistic religions, there's this whole understanding of God as being omnipotent and omniscient, and all of these different qualities, and different religions view this differently. And it's not just about the qualities of God, but it's also understanding why do we believe in a God. And the same thing is it's a question that is overwhelming, because it applies to big questions, but it also applies to very small questions, very small decisions that we take on a daily basis. And so this is a very relevant dialogue for all of us. It's something that we should all read at least once in our lifetimes. And the question itself is also very important philosophically, because here we get a hint of, the difference between the genus and the differentia. So basically the genus is the main category, the main umbrella term for something, not term, but the umbrella category for something. And then there's the differential, what makes it different from other things. And this is something that I discovered 2 years ago when I took a course on Aristotle, right? Because Aristotle is the one who actually makes the difference between these two things. Yeah, he says like there's animal, which is the genus, and then there's rational, which is the differentia, and then the rational animal is man. So it was very poetic. I was extremely, mesmerized when I was reading that. But yeah, so people think it may be such a small question, but it has teleological relevance. It also has philosophical relevance. It also has normal relevance for normal people who are not into philosophy. And I think this is what makes this dialogue extremely important. And also the fact that Euthyphro basically ran away from Socrates when he went back to the original definition. This is us, again, like the Little Prince. He decided to run away.
Right.
He just decided to run away. Everyone decides to run away, which is horrible. And this is something that we should tell ourselves and, sit with ourselves and, speak, have a very good monologue and internalize this issue, because running away I don't think it's the right choice.
But maybe
as accountable.
Maybe he did have to run away just to be a little bit more charitable to him. but
yeah, I mean, Socrates is overwhelming.
He needed a little bit more time to let those insights sink in. I think he needed to take a break and then maybe come back later to this similar conversation. Yeah, but
true.
To play the devil's advocate a little bit, there is something that humans are very good at, and no other animal is as good as humans, and that is imitation and picking up conventions, picking up norms. Like even children at the age of 2 years old, they can, when they see someone doing something like play with a toy in a certain way, the child looks at it and doesn't just choose it. The child's interpretation is not just that that's how it's done, but that's how it should be done. And
Yes.
if they see another child playing in a different way with the same toy, the child will say, no, you shouldn't. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to. So we enforce, detect, and enforce norms, which
Yes.
is basically the capacity to not question conventions, to leave
Yes.
things on, and that helps us become peaceful participants in the order
Of
of things.
society, yeah.
Yeah, in a
Yes.
society. So
And
people,
I think,
yeah.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
why
sorry.
somebody like Socrates is a very anti-traditional figure,
Yes.
and it is
Yes.
doomed to be
die. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, we're all doomed to die anyway.
Sure.
But I mean, Socrates is our modern day Anonymous. The only thing is that he wasn't anonymous. That's it. I mean, it's. I think everyone should at least give a chance to Socrates. You know, not just think of him as being sarcastic or as being annoying or as wanting to punch him in the face.
Mm-hmm.
Just try to get under your own walls, because when you were saying that we are not used to how can I say it, we're not we're used to just fit in society and not question conventions. I think this is very important for the Little Prince as well, because I think that there's this collective understanding, this what Jung was saying, the collective unconscious, and the archetypes. I mean, the archetypes are situated in this collective unconscious, and this just makes it so easy for us to just fit in society the way it is, because it's part of our genetic baggage in a sense. I mean, it's in our psyche from the day we're born, and that's it. This is what we do. This is how we deal with things. But it takes a lot of courage to speak your mind and go against those mainstream trends.
Yes.
And this is what Plato actually said. We should never follow doxa. This is bad. We shouldn't do that. We shouldn't follow mainstream ideas and mainstream people and just go with the flow. This is not how we do it. We have to think and think for ourselves. And I think, I mean, this is the pandemic just showed how much people were following it, and it also showed how the pandemic uncovered structures of injustice and how people are waking up and they're becoming Socrates. Everyone is becoming Socrates in a sense, questioning everything and trying to understand what is the form, right? What is the original ideal abstract of something. But of course, they're not thinking about the form. I'm just saying. It's just very interesting to see the world change the way it is. It actually gets me really excited because I'm like, oh wow, he was right. I mean, we were living in the world of doxa, and now we're waking up, which I think is important.
Right. Now, let me ask you something about reading Plato. When you read the dialogues, do you find yourself like detecting clues? Like there are these little features, like accidental features, like Socrates says something random about something irrelevant to the main theme of the dialogue, but actually it is in some way related. Do you find yourself do that? It's a lot of fun.
Yes, because I mean, Socrates does leave clues for people. Like, he always gives them a chance to bail out. And he always gives them the chance to go back and say, oh, wait a minute. And he always gives us the chance to pick up clues and say, oh, this is what happens in my life too, right? It's relatable. It's not something that is outside of this world, right? It's not in its own tower. And I think this is why a lot of philosophy is not being studied by people, or at least it's not being read, and it's not being enjoyed by people because it's not relatable. I mean, the existentialists were the one, like Sartre, who used to write through novels and send messages through those novels. But many philosophers are inaccessible even to people who study philosophy. I mean, there are many philosophers I consider really complicated, and then I just give up because the ideas are they're too complex. I don't relate to them.
Yeah.
There's too much there's too much, technical words that I don't know, and that I have to, read at least like 5 different books to understand the meaning of the word and how it has developed and how it's been received and how, other people consider it. And this is good academic practice. Like, I wish we should do that, right? But at the same time, it just takes away the enjoyment of just sitting and reading a book. You want to read because you want to be engulfed by this book. You also want to enjoy it. You want to engage with it. And it's very hard if you have to stop every 2 seconds and write a note, write, for example, oh, check this out later on because you don't understand it. And if you don't understand it, then you can't move forward. And so it becomes really frustrating.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Plato is the easiest thing to read. No, because there's like the genus and the differentia. A normal person who reads the book for the first time, wouldn't know it, but after a while you get to know this. But this doesn't deny you the experience of reading the book and enjoying it nonetheless for the first time. And I keep on saying normal people, but by normal people I say people who don't study philosophy. But I mean, we're also like people who study philosophy are also normal, so it's just some weird understanding I have of people. But I mean, this is what I meant: people who don't study philosophy, right? Who just want to read it. You just don't get it. I mean, not you, like you in general. Like people just, I mean, Kant, for example, or I don't know, Hegel. You need some training before reading them. You really do. You really do. Or for example, psychoanalysis and Lacan. Lacan is one of the hardest psychoanalysts. It's very hard to understand his work, and it's just incredibly dense. So there's complexity in everything, but I think that philosophy has a huge role in our lives and should be more accessible to people. This is something that's important, I think, for me at least.
I agree with you. We shouldn't have to choose between popularized versions of philosophy and then unreadable primary sources. And that's why I'm also very grateful that we have things like Plato, which is first-rate philosophy, but at the same time accessible, very accessible.
Exactly. Sorry. Yeah.
So
I was just looking at the book, and it's just there's notes. There are questions that I ask myself, and over the course of time, questions have developed and questions have become different and different levels of complexity, but it's still accessible. It's a dialogue. It's I just tell my students it's like a WhatsApp conversation. Just read it as if it's like a screenshot from a WhatsApp conversation. And they start to understand, oh, okay, so they're talking and there's an issue and they're trying to get at the bottom of the issue. Exactly. Just that. Just start with that. And then you can, you're on your way to understand it even better.
Yes. And then on top of that, there's this enjoyment, aesthetic enjoyment. It's very beautiful. Very beautiful. When I catch a cold or a flu or something and I have to stay in bed, sometimes I read Plato.
Oh, wow. Plato as a medicine.
Yeah, just because it calms me down. It's kind of like those childhood stories that, especially if it is not the first time I'm reading something like the Meno, it's so calming. It's calming, and it's indicative of like, oh, there's a beautiful world out there that exists, and if I get better, I feel better, then I can go back and join it.
Yes.
That's the idea.
I think I mean, we should all read a little bit more philosophy. Like even people who study it, they should read more philosophy that they enjoy, rather than being forced to read something over and over and over again because it's part of a curriculum, right? So I mean, I think we should all have more time to read the philosophy we enjoy.
Somebody recently on Twitter said that, oh, I can't believe some people prefer Plato over Aristotle.
Well, I honestly prefer Aristotle over Plato
Aristotle
too.
I would say he's more important, and he's more concerned with naming things and differentiating things. And he also says occasionally in the Ethics, he says like, there's no name for this, but, and then he describes it. For him, having a name for something is very important. But I think for
Yes.
Plato, relatively speaking, he's not as concerned with naming and categorizing.
Because he has a name, but he just wants to find a definition.
Right.
So
Wow.
it's a different kind of, like, I think it's a different kind of approach.
Yeah.
And I think it's also about the translation that we pick, because for Aristotle, when I studied it, my professor, she gave us a very good translation, the one by Joe Sachs, and it's incredible, because then I read other books with different translation and commentaries, and I always prefer Joe Sachs, because he's just translating it the way it is. Okay, Greek, I mean, translating from ancient Greek is difficult, but he just says it. It's almost like literal translation, right? So you see, you can actually see Aristotle saying, oh, so this is a thing, but I'm not sure what kind of thing, but I'm not even sure if it's a thing, right? It's this kind of, translate, yes. But it's really good, especially because we read the Anima. It's on the Soul, and it was really, really interesting. Really, really interesting. But Plato I have a soft spot for Plato in my heart, because he was my first philosophical love, in a sense.
Great.
And so, yeah, he's always going to stay in my heart.
Great. Yeah, I feel similarly. Did you want to say something else about the dialogues, about Plato's dialogues, before we move to poems?
No, I think, I mean, I could spend hours and hours and hours speaking about the dialogues, but I think I'm good. I mean, I think that it's clear why I like this book, and I think it's clear why I like the dialogue with Euthyphro. I like all of them. I love them all. But Euthyphro is very special to me, because it just shows my progress, my development, my intellectual development.
Right. And let me mention this. I don't know, maybe you won't agree with me, but unlike The Little Prince, the dialogues are not depressing. They're not sad.
Actually, no, I didn't find them depressing either.
Yeah.
Like, I was depressed because I wasn't understanding them. But then, I just moved on. I took my time in understanding them, and every time I'm very happy. I'm sad. I get really, really sad when Socrates dies. But he was, if you think about it, he was very old. He had a purpose in life. He had a mission. He made sure that we know he had that mission. I mean, the fact that we read this today is an accomplishment. So we must think of we must think of Socrates as being happy.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Very.
Yeah. And so, if Socrates is happy, I mean,
yes.
We'll be happy too.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, like, the moment that comes to my mind now is like Socrates pushing the rock until the very end.
Sisyphus Socrates.
The guard comes to him in the Phaedo, and he says, Socrates, you shouldn't speak too much, because if you speak, we have to give you the poison will not work. We have to give you 2-3 portions. So better be quiet. And Socrates says, okay, you better go and make the 2-3 portions, because I'm not going to be quiet now. I'm with my friends. I want to continue talking. That's very beautiful.
Yes. And there's a painting. I always forget the name of the painter. There is a painting that represents the scene where, like, Socrates has the poison in his hand, and it's the last moment, and he's going to die, and he's surrounded by his friends, and you see the sadness and despair in his friends. Like, you see them like this, or like crying, or like doing this, and it's very interesting. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful paintings. I love them. I mean, there are many paintings about, like, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, all of them, but this one is one of my favorite. Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to the third book.
Yes, we shall. Okay. Yeah, I thought I'd be more anxious, but it's actually nice talking about something in a way that is not academic, in the sense of, like, I'm not teaching it to someone.
Yeah.
I'm just discussing it. It's nice.
Yeah, actually, one of let me add a footnote to what you said. I totally agree with your sentiment. One of my favorite books is a memoir written by a guy from Iran who is a composer. The name of the book, it's not translated to English, but the name of the book is Times Without Memories, or Times Without Memory. And in the beginning of the book, he says, well, I'm a musician, I'm not a writer, so I'm totally free. I can write in any way I want. And I really admire that. So anytime I decide to talk about something, even if it is psychology, especially philosophy, or when I'm writing or speaking, I always tell myself, like, this is not really who I am. It's not what I do. So that gives me freedom to do it in any way I want, and make any mistakes or break any rules.
Actually, I can totally relate to this also as a student of philosophy, because I wasn't trained in philosophy from the very beginning. So I've been studying like philosophy academically only for the past 2 years. And there are so many things I still don't know and I don't understand. And, I'm completely ignorant about. And I think this is also one of the things that made me really anxious. Because, what if a philosopher watches the video and I say something wrong? What would happen? And I'm just like, it's okay. I made a mistake. I learned from my mistakes. I mean, we read books over and over and over again until we understand them. And on the way, we make a lot of mistakes and we mispronounce things. We give wrong meanings to different words, and it's okay. I mean, I think this is the core of my anxiety, making a mistake that is so fatal that other philosophers would be like, oh my God, how could she say that? But, who cares?
Right.
Who cares?
Exactly.
I'm here and this is what I love and that's it.
Yeah, I really admire that. I'm very happy to hear that. Good.
Yeah, and I'm very happy you gave me this chance of overcoming my own anxiety.
My pleasure.
Although indirectly, but it's very important.
All right, let's book number 3.
Yes, book number 3. Okay, so this is my current favorite. I've been reading it over and over again, and Nizar has become, I think, my favorite poet in the whole world. I wasn't into poetry. I wasn't that much into poetry actually before, but then I realized that poetry is the one thing that speaks to people, especially the Arab world, because poetry has been a tool for communication for so long. And it's not just the Arab world, it's the Middle East in general. It's this part of the world. And I say this part of the world because I'm in Cairo, Egypt. And so, this part of the world is very artistic and very romantic and very rich in content. I mean, in content, yes. I mean, there's so much one can read and can understand from poetry, especially because it's always infused with a lot of politics and social issues, and I think this is the case for Nizar. So Nizar was originally Syrian. He was born in Damascus, and he was born in a very conservative family, which is like the traditional thing to happen. I mean, if you're born from a Middle Eastern family, most probably your family will be conservative.
Yes.
And, I'm actually very comfortable speaking about this because even if partially this is also the society I come from, right? Okay, I may not be like 100%, but I'm very comfortable because this is what I see and this is my experience. And I know how maybe outraged people may be in hearing, oh, the Middle East is conservative. Well, I'm not saying it in an Orientalist way. I'm just describing something that I have experienced myself. And so, yes, it's normal to be born in a conservative family in the Middle East. And he was born in the 20s, and he died not very recently, but he died in 1998. He had a good life, he had a good long life, and he produced so much that I don't think I would have enough time to read, because his writing is so intense, and it really touches parts within you that are very important, especially if you're a woman. Because he kind of found freedom and liberation through eroticism. And I find this brilliant. He was a brilliant writer. So I think like any other writer, he's been through phases. So in the 40s, there's this beginning, there's this exploration of his poetry, especially his erotic poetry. But the thing is that in the 40s we also have the Nakba. The Nakba is known as the first Arab-Israeli war, and so in the Middle East there is this, sadness and uncertainty about the future, and this really does affect his writing. But then, in a sense, his writing develops a lot in the 50s, and it's in the 50s that we see the most erotic poetry, right? Because I think it was in the 50s that he wrote a poetry on two lesbians making love to one another. And so this sexuality is already a taboo. And then you add homosexuality, which is a higher level of taboo for the society he used to live in. I mean, now things have changed, but I still see a lot of young people, including people from my generation, having a lot of grudges towards our society. There's a lot of baggage, in a sense, when it comes to taboos like sexuality, right? There's a lot of anger and frustration, but I think it's also because we're not really in touch with what our culture and society has to offer us, especially someone like Nizar, right? He gives us a point of view, a perspective that was very rare back then, but it was there. That's the point. It's like we're not really in touch with the roots, but we're only seeing the negative part of the society we live in. And I think this is common among all societies. It's very easy to point out the negative sides of it, the negative characteristics, but at the same time, we need to know that there is so much good and so much artistic production that can be, read, enjoyed, evaluated. There's just so much. And I think Nizar does really bring forward a discussion that needs to be highlighted or examined in a way, especially because what I can say is that the society is a society of shame. It's not a society of guilt. Especially because when Nizar was writing, the woman was someone who was pure. The sexual integrity of the woman was extremely important. And if something would happen to this integrity, then it would be shameful. It would be dishonorable, not just for her, but for her family. And the dishonor of the family would be more, how can I say it? It would be heavier. It would be more important than her own shame, right? And so I think one of his main missions was to uncover this shame and say, no, this is normal. Because as people, we have dreams and desires, and it's normal to have these desires. And I think this is why I love Nizar so much, because he was brave enough to say, no, this is not shameful. This is normal. This is natural. And we should actually embrace it. And the idea is that many people consider him as a pornographic writer, but he isn't. He honestly isn't. And the fact that he's being classified sometimes as pornographic makes me realize that they still see Nizar as someone who's doing something that is inappropriate. But to me, he isn't. I mean, control of their own bodies, their own sexuality, their own desires. And so I'm not saying that he is the liberator of women in the Middle East. No, this is not what I'm saying. But through his poetry, we see this understanding of the female experience that is important. And I think Nizar does really speak to people of my generation, the people of the 90s, right? Just like Plato, he needs to be reintroduced. Just like The Little Prince, I think I like all of these three books are so different, but the common theme is the bravery of the person who wrote them, right? The bravery of The Little Prince, the bravery of Socrates, and the bravery of Nizar, right? It's just going against this mainstream ideas that embrace you in a way that it's more of a cage than an embrace, right? It's just like, no, I don't want to be like this. This is not what I think. This is not my experience. I have my own experience, and I should be capable of experiencing it. And I think this is why Nizar is really, amazing. And I think he's also targeting something that I really enjoy, which is understanding taboo. And I mean, Freud wrote about taboo, and I love what he wrote about taboo because it makes you think that how it makes you understand, how can I say it, how easy in a way are human beings, right? We're just afraid of the punishment that comes if we actually break the taboo. Obviously, Freud is not easy at all. It's a very complex analysis of taboo, right? And it takes time and effort to get through the text. But what I'm saying is that it's fear. We are afraid of the consequences of our actions. And this is why we run away, right? Like Euthyphro, like the Little Prince. But Nizar was not afraid. He broke free, and he wrote about women and their desires and their sexuality. And the problem is that, as I told you, in a culture of shame, you shame the person because you're afraid that the others would be inspired to break the same exact taboo. And I think shame is a force of containment in a sense. But Nizar is not just about the sexuality of women. No, Nizar brought a lot of things, a lot of poetry that is related to the experience of women, that is not necessarily sexual.
Actually,
and is not necessary.
Actually, sorry to interrupt you, but I would say that even sexuality is not just about sexuality.
Exactly. Yes.
In
Yes. I totally agree.
in this one poem that you sent me, it's so obvious that, of course, the theme of sexuality is there, but there is something that
Yes.
is deeper, that is working, that is at work, and that is the thing that is at work is ontological. It is about being a certain way and not being denied as what someone is, and having the space in which you can exist the way you are and not be forced into being something else or being called something else. So many other things.
Yes, exactly. Like, he's so good in capturing the essence of being a woman. And now, I mean, being a woman obviously is very different from being a woman in the 20s or the 30s or the 40s, the 50s and everything. But at the same time, there's still things that I'm going to say I, because it's my experience, I can relate to. And, you know, the fact that he was so good at capturing this essence, it makes me feel like, I think intersubjectivity is possible. Because basically intersubjectivity is this concept in phenomenology where basically you put yourself in someone else's shoes. Very easily put. And I mean, this poem is the proof that maybe this is possible, right? Because he captured it so well. And actually the poem that I sent you is my favorite one for this exact reason. He was very good at capturing the essence of being a woman. And the fact that he starts by saying, I am a woman, is just literally amazing. I mean, I get emotional every time I read it. And I think, how can a man write something like this? You know, you actually question yourself, how can a man write something like this? How does he understand so well? I mean, besides he was surrounded by women, like all his life revolved around women, his friends, his lovers, his mother, you know, he had 2 wives and both of them died. And it's so heartbreaking, because in many poems you also feel that there is a lot of sadness and loss, especially when his son died. Actually, it was Nizar who had a son who passed away. And you feel the sadness, and he's just so good at conveying emotions. And I think everyone should also read his translations. I mean, not most of his works are not really translated, but there are some that are, and we try always to get translations from people who are native speakers, because they catch the essence, because they know, like, the meaning of the word and the societal context. Sometimes things are slang and, you know, they don't really make sense, and so we try to find a translation that, you know, fits in.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's like Aristotle and Joe Sachs. Always try to find a good translation so you can get to the core of the book. Yeah,
Sure.
so I would be happy to read one of his poems. It's very short.
Please.
And it's just, it's very short.
Mm.
But I think it's, I can't read Diary of an Indifferent Woman because it's super long. And I'll probably cry on camera. And I don't think this is,
And then I'll cry.
I don't think this, yeah, and everyone will cry. And like, you know, it's a very sad video from the very beginning to the end. And
Yes,
I don't think we need this at this point, especially in quarantine. So this is called Plan for Abducting a Woman I Love. Even the title, I mean,
amazing.
It's, yes, maybe I'm biased, and I can totally, you know, see through my bias. But he's just really good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he starts by saying, as all years begin and end with you, so at the outset of this one, there's no need for a declaration of my love for you. It would be laughable to do that, for your presence is timeless, and you command the portals of the hours. So it's very short. It's a couple of lines, but we get how much he values women, you know, how much he loves women. And I chose the specific poem, not just because it's short, but it's because once I was presenting a paper on Nizar and intersubjectivity, and the reception of older people to Nizar's poetry kind of unsettled me, because they said, but Nizar always objectifies women in his poetry. And I was just really confused, because every time I read his poetry, I'm like, wow, he really does get me. So I started questioning myself. Is it because I considered myself as an object, and I don't consider myself as an active subject in society? And this is why I think he's this amazing, and his poetry is so good in capturing the essence of being a woman. Or it's because the person who reacted to the poetry sees women as objects, and so interprets the poetry as in depicting women as objects of his inquiry. Obviously, you know, there's this whole discussion of the male gaze and how the male is, you know, how can I say it? The male is looking at the woman as an object to start with. He doesn't recognize it as a subject, right? So there's no chance for a possible interaction. But at the same time, I ask myself, why is this? You know, and so this is also why I like Nizar so much, because he made me question my understanding of myself as a woman. It's not just, oh my God, he's so good, but it's also about, again, questioning, introspection, inquiring on our beliefs. And again, I think this is the common theme among all of the three books. You just question yourself a lot. You need to understand, why do I believe this? Why do I believe this is important? What are the consequences of my beliefs? I mean, there's so many things that we should examine in our lives.
It's very interesting. The responses that they gave, that their response was so different, so vastly different from, and almost dismissing
exactly. Work. It basically just abolished whatever I was saying. It just dismantled it completely. And I was just like confused.
So did they tell you, did they introduce another name? So did they say that what you are trying to do is better done if you pick this poet?
No.
They just wanted
I think it was a very spontaneous kind of criticism. I don't think that the goal was to enrich the presentation or the paper academically, but I think it was more of, they were hit by my interpretation of the poetry, I think. And this triggered a reaction that was very spontaneous. And I think this is also the good thing about, you know, live conferences and presentations, because you get to see the audience. Like, I don't get to see the reader when they read something I wrote, but I get to see their faces when I say what I wrote. And I think this was a very, very good presentation, not because the presentation was good, but it was good because I got insights from the audience. And I think it was an insight that I actually needed to understand my bias for Nizar, but at the same time also see how I considered myself, because sometimes rationally we understand we're all subjects in this world, and to a certain extent the subject deals with other subjects, but sometimes the subject encounters subjects who we believe are objects, and this is something everyone is very uptight about. Like, no, I don't think this way, no, I don't feel this way about other people, but sometimes we do. And we need to understand why we feel in a certain way, why we think someone is less, why we think someone is not worthy of certain things like we are. And it's personal bias that we need to explore. And I think this is also very relevant for our time, because now we see a stronger focus on Black Lives Matter, and we see a stronger focus on minorities, and we need to look at our own bias. Okay, yes, it's our own experience of the world. Yes, this is how we feel, and we are entitled to our own feelings. But whenever we feel something, we also need to rationalize it in a sense. Why am I feeling this way, right? We need to think. And this I think this is also a major feature of why I like his poetry so much, because it happened in a way that it forced me to a certain extent to inquire on my own status in this world. Am I subject or am I just an object? And I think I'm still in that journey. Like, I realize I'm a subject, but sometimes I just felt like piety. I'm pious because I'm being loved by the gods, and not because I'm pious myself, right? So it's a continuous cycle of self-discovering and understanding. And,
yes, I understand.
And
I think it's really great. The thing that is most salient for me now is this relationship you have with this author, with this poet. That's really special. That's really, it's really special to have. And many people go through their lives not knowing what it is like to have someone that you admire, you feel understood by, even though they have already gone, they've already passed away, but they make you feel like there was a perspective that gets you or gets something very important about what it means to be human. And I'm excited when you talked about your presentation. I wished you published that soon, and I'm looking forward to reading it. It's kind of analysis using the work of a poet.
Yes, I can actually send it to you. Sure. It's still a working draft.
Okay.
I'd be more than happy to send it to you, actually. But I feel, I always feel like my work is never good enough to be.
I mean, nobody's work is ever good enough.
I don't know, I'm having like those doubts about my work and the quality of the work that I produce, but I'll send it to you.
Sure.
Today I'm overcoming a lot of anxiety, actually. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And of course, needless to say, I'll keep it to myself and I will not share it with anybody else. But it's also a way to, I think part of this whole learning process as an academic is to overcome these internal obstacles. Like, I know this is not good enough, but I'd like to see it out there, and I'd like other people to read it and give me some feedback. It's part of being in an exchange with the world.
Yes,
it's part of poking the world and see how the world responds.
It pokes you back.
Right.
Yes, and it's very hard because I don't want to. I'm not going to victimize myself, but it's very different for being or coming from an Eastern country, being a woman, not having a title yet, like a doctor or professor. It's just me. But I think it's, despite all these not difficulties, but despite everything, I'm always, motivated by, good comments and feedback. And even if the feedback is pointing out a lot of weaknesses in my work, it's still feedback. And it still means that this person believes that there is something good about the work. So this is why they're trying to help me and improve it. And I think this is really good. I love people who give me feedback, especially extensive feedback. Like, I like people who write comments and then write me like paragraphs under my work, because then I get to see their perspective on things. Like at the conference, I got to see that person's reaction, and at least now, even if I don't see their faces, they're writing me extensive feedback, and so I understand how they feel about the work and what they think of the work, most importantly. And I'll try to be more out there. I'll try to see if like someone is interested in, publishing it maybe, but I'll definitely send it to you.
Great.
I'll be more than happy to send it to you.
Sure. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
All right. Does he have, I'm curious, does he have any other kinds of works, like essays or novel?
He does. He
right.
actually does.
Okay.
I'm not sure about novels, but towards the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, he wrote a lot of poetry and a lot of, short essays. I'm not sure if they're short essays, but he wrote a lot about defeat and bitterness and sadness.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, right?
Sounds like my kind of guy.
Because of the Naksa. The Naksa is when the Arabs felt defeated by the Israeli army, and it's I think it's a very important historical moment for the whole region, because there is the sense of bitterness and defeat and sadness. It's in everybody's heart. And again, he's just so good at capturing the essence of this sadness. And I think those political writings would be perfect for you if you love these kind of bitterness and sadness. But I prefer his love and love poetry. That's my thing.
Okay.
Because in political science we study this all the time, and my heart is broken enough. I mean, I need Nizar to heal it. I can't read his sad stuff. And also he's writing on his son. Like I think it's called it has to do with the prince. His name his son's name was Tawfiq, and he wrote something. I don't remember the title, but I can look for it and send it to you if you'd like.
Sure.
It's extremely sad. Hopefully there will be an English translation. If not, I can try and translate it. Yeah, but I don't guarantee anything because my Arabic is not that good.
Sure. If I may ask, what is the thesis that you're working on for your master's?
I'm very happy to say that I'm working on Maurice Merleau-Ponty's work on embodiment and feminism, which is something I'm very interested in, obviously. I mean, this whole discussion on Nizar, should have pointed at it. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm trying to understand the notion of embodiment in phenomenology and see how it can explain embodied experience in revolution for women. I know it's a bit difficult because I'm tackling different aspects of embodiment. So I'm looking at embodiment phenomenologically, and I'm looking at Heidegger as well. I'm looking mainly at Merleau-Ponty, but I'm also looking at Husserl, and I'm looking at Heidegger, and I'm looking at different definitions for it. But I'm also looking at feminist phenomenology. So I'm looking at the work of Judith Butler. I'm working with Layla Ahmad, not with her directly. I'm working with her work. I'm engaging with her writing. And I'm also looking at Luce Irigaray and many more feminist philosophers. And I think this is very good because, philosophy is not a secret. Philosophy is a lot of men explaining a lot of things to a lot of people. Right. And so I'm not denying the existence of female philosophers, but they're really, really outnumbered, and the problem is that there's, especially in phenomenology, this is description of experience. And so the description of experience, we're always reading the experience of a white man describing things. And this whole, push into feminist phenomenology is very important for me, because at least there is a guideline to follow. I have role models I can look at, but at the same time, it's still a white woman who does it. And so how can I say, the other side of the story is not really there. And I'm not saying they don't, feminist phenomenologists that are not white don't exist. Layla Ahmed is an example, right? And there are many other scholars. I mean, there are many other scholars like Layla Boulouhoud, or like Layla, there's another Layla Ahmed, Amina Wadoud. I mean, there are so many non-white scholars that come from this region that discuss those issues, but they're not as seen as the Western counterpart. And I think it's important to, I don't believe in, dichotomies exist, but I don't believe that, if I'm using Western literature, then I shouldn't use Eastern literature. No, I think they're very complementing, and we can include different elements from different points of view. And I'm trying to do this. It's very hard because sometimes I'm not sure where I stand. And it's a personal bias. Like, am I being objective, or am I just being subjective? And I'm trying to include something that is more of me, but this more of me is not relevant to what I'm trying to say. And so, admitting that another version of something that I thought was right is actually right is difficult. But it's it's research. This is how we overcome our own bias and try to become as objective as possible, right?
Yes.
So I think this project is not just a thesis, because I hate people when they write the thesis because they have to. No, it's a project that I find myself in. It's something I enjoy, especially because I'm looking at the 25th of January revolution, and so it's an event I witnessed myself. It's not a revolution that happened long time ago. Yes, I was way younger, but at the same time, it's something recent. I saw it. I experienced it. My body was there, right? I saw it. I touched it. I felt it. I smelled the revolution had a smell for some reason, but it was a full experience. I'm not just reading it from books, and so I think this is what makes it very special for me. Yeah, I hope to finish it because I'm getting really tired, but yeah.
Yeah,
I hope it's
it sounds really ambitious. It sounds like a really, and I wish there was. I wish the systems in place were fair enough that sometimes they would look at the thesis and would say, "Oh, this is too big. This is too good for a master's thesis, so we are going to give you a PhD."
Oh well.
Unfortunately,
I mean,
it doesn't work that way in most places. But I think it should.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I know it's a very ambitious project, and but I'm always trying to do things from humble place, because I read a lot of books and articles from people who feel so entitled and think that just because of who they are, they can say certain things, and I just can't get past that.
Yeah.
It's important to contribute to the literature, but at the same time, it's also important to understand that there are people who have done this before you, and this is the most important. This is it's a thing that really catches you, and you're just really not expecting it, because you're thinking, oh, this is a great idea, and I think I'm going to be the pioneer of this idea, and then you realize that thousands and thousands of people have brought about it. But this is also another part of research. I think that you discover a lot about yourself, you discover a lot about others, and your understanding of the world around you also changes. Because when you think that you're the first one to think about it, then you say, oh my God, the world is such an unjust world, and it's full of injustice, and I can't handle it anymore. And then someone like Nizar comes up to you and you're like, or any other person. But
I think that the value in that experience of being able to appreciate someone else is as great as being the first person who says something. I mean, that's
Exactly.
one of the things that changes over time, at least in my experience, is that I'm emphasizing less and less the desire to be original. It's just, if it happens, then great, but it doesn't have to. It can be enjoyable if without it, just as somebody who understands and expresses ideas in a different way.
And I think that not being like super original doesn't deny the contribution or the creativity of the thing we produce. Make it art or literature or research, academic research. I mean, there are standards that must be followed, and so in a way it's going to standardize, right? But at the same time, it's going to be unique, just like the rose, because it's your rose, you tamed it, you have a relationship with it, and so this is why it's unique. It's our own experience, it's our subjective production of work, and so I think this is good enough. When not all of us are going to be Nietzsche, not all of us are going to be, I don't know, Sartre or Heidegger or Merleau-Ponty. Not all of us can be that. And it's okay.
Of course it's okay.
I mean, we're not going to all make groundbreaking philosophy, and we have to overcome that. Right. But we can still make philosophy. It's not, it's this way or the highway. No. There's always a middle way we can embark.
That's right.
But it doesn't mean that we have to give up on our dreams, okay? Because the Little Prince says this to us. We don't have to give up on our dreams, but at the same time, we shouldn't just let go of it because we're not super excellent.
I agree. All right. Well, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.